So if you were tasked with building a habitat for, say, a silverback gorilla at a zoo, there's this incredibly strict, mathematically precise manual you have to follow.
Right, you can't just throw them in a cage and hope for the best.
Exactly. You need the exact right foliage. You need a specific ambient temperature. You need the precise social groupings, or else, the animal suffers.
Yeah, it gets stressed, it gets sick.
Right. Its immune system compromises. But then you look at humans. I mean, we took our own species, a species that is biologically and neurologically wired over millions of years for open savannas.
For tracking seasons, living in small, tight-knit tribes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we just dropped ourselves into these towering, roaring, densely packed concrete jungles. We basically completely overrode our own biological habitat manual practically overnight.
It is the absolute definition of a radical environmental shock. I mean, we're living right in the middle of this grand, totally uncontrolled biological experiment.
Uncontrolled is right.
And, the sheer velocity of this change is what makes it so incredibly disorienting. If you map out the entire timeline of human existence, the city is, well, it's basically a rounding error. It just appeared out of nowhere.
The timeline is what really puts this into perspective for me.
Mm.
So picture the year 1800, the global population is growing, the steam engine is, starting to make waves, but at that point, a mere 3% of humans lived in cities.
Just 3%.
Right, just 3%. And you fast forward to 1900, the dawn of the 20th century, the second industrial revolution is just roaring. Steel is being forged, electricity is lighting up the night, and we're still only at, 14%?
Yeah, about 14%.
Yeah.
Which is still overwhelmingly rural.
But then we hit this monumental tipping point, the year 2007.
Yeah, 2007 was the threshold. Because for the first time in the entire history of the human race, more than half the global population became urban.
Which is just wild to think about. And today, right now, we sit at about 56%. And we are hurtling towards 68% by the year 2050.
It's exponential.
It is. We have effectively transformed from a rural agrarian species to an urban species in roughly 2 centuries.
Which is, it's absolutely nothing in evolutionary time. 2 centuries doesn't even give our genetics time to stretch, let alone truly adapt.
Right.
And that forces us to really examine how we're actually coping with this environment.
So in this deep dive, we are going to thoroughly unpack exactly what cities are, why they even exist, what they actually do to our brains on a hard neurological level, and how they are fundamentally shaping the future of our species.
Because it really is the most significant and rapid demographic shift in human history.
Without a doubt. But before we get into the neuroscience of it all, I want you, the person listening to this right now, to just picture your own environment.
Yeah, take a second and look around.
Whether you're walking down a crowded sidewalk dodging pedestrians, or maybe you're sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic on a multi-lane highway, or just looking out a window at a skyline. Just consider how this invisible architecture all around you is actively shaping your thoughts, your stress hormones, and your opportunities at this very moment.
To understand how that architecture really shapes you, you have to look at the mismatch between the hardware you are running and the software of the city.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, we established the speed of this demographic shift, right? Now look at the brain itself. The human brain evolved to handle a very specific social capacity.
Right, the ancestral brain.
Exactly. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar famously quantified this as Dunbar's number. It's the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships.
Which is roughly 150 people, right?
Approximately 150, yeah. For the vast, overwhelming majority of our evolutionary history, your brain was perfectly optimized for an environment where you knew literally everyone you would ever encounter.
You understood the social hierarchy.
Exactly. You knew who owed whom a favor. You knew who the troublemakers were. Your interactions were strictly face-to-face, and they were always contextualized by a shared, intimate history.
So encountering a total stranger on the ancestral savanna wasn't just like a casual Tuesday. It was a massive, highly unusual event.
It was potentially life-threatening.
Right.
It demanded intense, immediate cognitive processing. Your brain had to flood the system with adrenaline and rapidly calculate, is this person a threat? Are they a competitor for resources? Are they an ally?
And now we take that exact same ancestral brain with those exact same primal threat detection
And
mechanisms.
deploy it in a modern megacity.
Yeah.
You put that brain in Tokyo or New York or Mumbai or Sao Paulo.
Where you are encountering tens of thousands of strangers on a single commute, just walking from the train to your office.
Precisely. We are forcing a brain designed for a 150-person hunter-gatherer tribe to process unprecedented, relentless stimulation and this staggering social complexity every single day.
It sounds exhausting.
The cognitive load of constantly analyzing the intentions of thousands of anonymous people around you is immense.
Which honestly sounds like a biological recipe for a complete psychological meltdown.
It heavily strains the system.
We are definitely going to get into the specific fMRI brain scans and what that does to us later. But this evolutionary mismatch begs a massive question for me.
What's that?
If this environment is such a profound shock to our system, I mean, if it stresses our ancient hardware to the breaking point, why on earth did we build it? What is a city, fundamentally, that makes it worth enduring this level of biological friction?
To answer that, we actually have to completely redefine our concept of what a city actually is.
Okay.
Because we have this tendency to define a city by its physical manifestation. We look at the skyline. We look at the concrete.
Here, the buildings, the roads.
Right. But the urban economist Edward Glaeser, in his work on the triumph of the city, points out that this is actually a fundamental category error.
A category error.
Yeah. A city is not its infrastructure. A city isn't the skyscrapers, the subway tunnels, the electrical grids, or the zoning boards.
So if it's not the concrete and steel, what is it?
Glaeser argues that a city is fundamentally just one thing, the proximity of people.
The proximity of people.
Yes, the absence of physical space between human beings. The infrastructure is merely the byproduct. It's just the necessary scaffolding required to allow millions of people to exist in that close proximity without dying of cholera.
Okay, let's unpack this because that is a total paradigm shift.
Okay.
If we think of a city as a giant piece of hardware, the buildings, the roads, the bridges, those are basically just the plastic casing.
Right, they're the motherboard.
Exactly. The actual software running the system, the thing that makes the machine do what it actually does, is human proximity and interaction.
That is the perfect way to view it. And when you look at it through that lens, you arrive at a pretty profound realization. Cities are actually the original communication technology.
Wow. Long before the smartphone. Long before fiber optics.
Long before the printing press, even.
Right.
Before any of that existed, how did a society transmit complex, nuanced ideas across large groups of people? How did you share artisanal skills or, legal frameworks or cultural norms in real time?
You needed a physical mechanism.
And the city was that mechanism. Think about the ancient Greek agora or the bustling medieval marketplace or the early European universities.
They weren't just physical locations to buy a sack of grain or listen to a lecture.
No, they were engineered physical technologies designed specifically to create a dense frequency of human interaction. They were basically human bandwidth.
I love that, human bandwidth. So if the city is a communication technology engineered to maximize connection, there must be a spectacular payout for plugging your brain into that network.
Oh, massive.
Because we wouldn't override our evolutionary programming and endure the noise, the crowds, and the stress if the return on investment wasn't astronomical.
And that return on investment is what economists call the agglomeration effect.
The agglomeration effect.
Yeah. This is the hard, measurable economic engine that fundamentally drives urbanization. The agglomeration effect refers to the distinct, compounding economic advantages that arise purely from concentrating activity in one single geographic location.
Okay, let's ground this for the listener. Give me the mechanics of how agglomeration actually plays out in the real world.
Sure. The canonical example is always Silicon Valley.
Right.
You have this unprecedented concentration of technology companies, specialized venture capital firms, highly trained software engineers, and a massive supporting cast of patent lawyers, specialized recruiters, and tech-focused marketers.
All just packed into a relatively small strip of land in Northern California.
Exactly.
But wait, in the era of cloud computing, why couldn't you just take those exact same companies, those exact same brilliant engineers, and just scatter them evenly across the American Midwest where land is cheap? Why wouldn't you get the exact same output?
Because you lose the spillovers.
It's spillovers.
Yeah. Economists divide knowledge into two types, explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is a formula. It's a manual. You can email explicit knowledge. But tacit knowledge is messy. It's the know-how.
The unspoken stuff.
Exactly. It's the subtle understanding of how to pitch a specific venture capitalist or a rumor about a new coding framework that's about to make an older one totally obsolete. Or even just an informal conversation about how to structure a specific type of database.
So it's not in a textbook.
No. Tacit knowledge only transfers through high bandwidth, face-to-face human interaction.
The famous knowledge spillover. It's like the engineers from 3 different competing startups bumping into each other at a coffee shop in Palo Alto and accidentally sharing a breakthrough while waiting for a latte.
Exactly. Ideas flow fluidly between firms because the people working at those firms are physically interacting outside the office. A brand new startup doesn't have to build an entire ecosystem from scratch. They just rent an office and plug right into a massive, invisible network of talent and expertise that the cluster has built up over decades.
That's fascinating. So the economic value isn't in the dirt they built the office on?
No, the value is entirely in the proximity to other minds.
And this clustering mechanism dominates almost every major industry. I mean, it's not just tech. Look at global finance. Why does it fiercely cluster in London, Manhattan, Hong Kong, and Singapore?
Right, they all group together.
Or look at the fashion industry. The heavyweights absolutely insist on concentrating in Milan, Paris, and New York. Film production anchors itself in Los Angeles. Cutting-edge academic research clusters tightly around a small handful of elite universities and the specific cities that host them, like Boston.
The companies cluster because the specialized labor pool is there. But the individual impact is just as fascinating, honestly. It's not just the mega corporations that benefit from agglomeration.
What do you mean?
The data consistently shows a massive, persistent wage premium for individuals who work in large cities.
Wait, you literally get paid a premium just for being physically present in the cluster.
Yes.
But is that just a basic cost of living adjustment? Like you get a higher salary because rent in Manhattan is totally absurd?
That's the logical assumption. But no, it goes much deeper than cost of living. Researchers control for that exact variable. They control for the specific industry. They control for the inherent characteristics, age, and education level of the worker.
And even with all that control.
Even with all those controls in place, the urban worker is fundamentally more productive. They learn faster because they are constantly exposed to more edge cases and rapid innovations.
So they're literally upgrading their skills faster.
Yes. They network more effectively. They encounter far more serendipitous ideas. Being physically embedded in the cluster literally makes the individual worker better at their job.
It's like the city is a performance-enhancing drug for your career.
That's a great way to put it.
You plug yourself into the local network, and the sheer density of information and ambition rubbing off on you increases your economic output.
But I have a major pushback here.
Let's hear it. We have just lived through a massive shift in remote work. We have Zoom, Slack, asynchronous collaboration tools. If I can instantly video conference with an engineer in Tokyo, a designer in Berlin, and a marketer in Austin, why does physical proximity still carry this massive wage and productivity premium? Doesn't the internet make the physical city totally obsolete?
You would intuitively think so. A lot of people predicted exactly that. But the digital nodes of communication on a Zoom call or a Slack channel are heavily filtered and highly intentional.
Intentionally.
A video meeting has an agenda. An email has a specific request. What the internet fails to replicate is the friction of serendipity.
The accidental stuff.
Exactly. It fails to replicate the accidental collisions. You don't accidentally overhear conversation on Zoom that changes your entire career trajectory.
Because everyone is just on mute until they have to present a slide.
Right. The physical city forces you into proximity with ideas and people you didn't deliberately seek out. And that unprogrammed accidental collision is the primary driver of true innovation.
So if bringing people together in physical space creates this compounding economic and creative engine, what happens to the math when you just keep multiplying the population?
It gets really interesting.
Like what happens when the city grows from 1 million people to 2 million to 10 million? If the city is a biological machine, is there a universal equation for how that machine scales?
There is. And the discovery of that equation completely altered the science of urban planning. It comes from the work of Geoffrey West, a theoretical physicist at the Santa Fe Institute, who partnered with researchers Luis Betancourt and Jose Lobo.
The fact that a theoretical physicist, someone who usually studies subatomic particles or like the expansion of the universe, decided to study urban zoning and sewer systems is already amazing to me.
Well, physicists are fundamentally obsessed with finding underlying universal laws. and West had previously done groundbreaking work on biological scaling laws. He looked at how mammals scale.
Oh.
For example, if you take a mouse and scale it up to the size of an elephant, its metabolic rate doesn't increase proportionally. An elephant is vastly more efficient at using energy per gram of tissue than a mouse is. As biological organisms get larger, their metabolism actually slows down. They scale sublinearly.
So an elephant's heart beats much slower than a mouse's heart.
Exactly. So West and his team wanted to know, does a city act like a biological organism? Does it slow down and become more efficient as it gets larger?
And what did they find?
They analyzed massive, sprawling data sets from hundreds of cities across multiple countries. They were looking at everything from the length of electrical cables to the number of patents filed, and they found that virtually every property of a city scales with its population according to a strict mathematical power law.
Meaning the output isn't just a flat one-to-one ratio as the population grows.
Right. And the math revealed a profound dichotomy. They found two completely different types of scaling happening simultaneously, sublinear and superlinear.
Okay, let's start with sublinear. What's scaling down?
Let's start with the physical infrastructure. The roads, the power lines, the water pipes, the gas mains. When a city doubles in population, you would naturally assume you need double the infrastructure, right? 100% increase in people means 100% increase in asphalt.
Seems like basic arithmetic. Twice the houses, twice the pipes.
But the data prove that wrong. When a city doubles its population, its infrastructure only increases by roughly 85%.
Oh, wow. Meaning there is a built-in 15% efficiency savings right off the top just by virtue of growing.
Yes. This is the sublinear scaling, much like the elephant's metabolism. Cities become inherently more physically efficient per capita as they grow. People share the same roads, the same power grid, the same subway lines. The physical footprint tightens. A resident of Manhattan uses far less gasoline, copper wire, and asphalt than a resident of a sprawling rural county.
Okay, so the concrete and steel scale sublinearly. The city gets more efficient materially. But what about the people? What about the economy?
This is where West's findings absolutely blew everyone away. The socioeconomic output of the city does not scale sublinearly. It scales superlinearly.
Superlinearly.
Yeah. When a city doubles in population, economic output, total wealth, and productivity don't just double. They increase by approximately 115%.
So wealth and productivity more than double. The larger the city, the more productive every individual person inside it becomes.
And the superlinear effect is even more dramatic when you look at innovation. If you track metrics like the number of patents filed, the number of new businesses incorporated, or the concentration of high-level creative professionals, when a city doubles, those specific metrics skyrocket by 115 to 130%.
That is massive.
It is. Larger cities are disproportionately mathematically guaranteed to be more innovative.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because West's power laws don't just apply to patents and GDP, do they? It's not just a mathematical formula for utopia.
No, it is a deeply tragic equation, honestly, because that exact same superlinear math applies to the dark side of human behavior.
The dark side.
Yeah. When a city doubles in population, social pathologies, the metrics we desperately want to minimize, like violent crime rates, the transmission speed of infectious diseases, and the number of traffic accidents, they also scale superlinearly at the exact same rate of 115%.
That is staggering. A 15% spike in genius and a 15% spike in murder. It's almost eerie how precise the underlying physics of human behavior are.
West codified this as the 15% rule. Every single time a city doubles in size, you get a 15% per capita systemic increase in the very best things humanity produces: the wealth, the wages, the technological breakthroughs,
Right.
and a 15% per capita increase in the very worst things: the crime, the disease, the social dysfunction.
It's an inescapable package deal. You literally cannot have the engine of human genius without simultaneously building an amplifier for human dysfunction.
Yeah.
But why? I mean, what is the actual mechanism connecting a spike in patent filings with a spike in violent crime?
West and his team argue they are inextricably linked because they are both outputs of the exact same underlying mechanism network theory and the frequency of human interaction.
Okay, explain that.
Imagine the city as a massive network of nodes. Every person is a node. As you add more nodes to a confined physical space, the number of potential connections between those nodes doesn't grow linearly, it grows exponentially.
Right. If you put more people in closer proximity, the velocity of the network just speeds up. You get far more human collisions.
Exactly.
And sometimes those collisions are two brilliant software engineers bumping into each other at a bar and deciding to found a billion-dollar startup. That's a patent. And sometimes those collisions are two exhausted, stressed out people bumping into each other in traffic and fighting over a parking spot. That's an assault. Or a pathogen jumping from one host to 50 on a crowded subway car. That's an epidemic.
The underlying mathematics of network velocity do not carry a moral compass. The math doesn't care if the interaction is positive or negative. It simply multiplies the frequency of all interactions. The city is just an indiscriminate accelerator.
So this brings us right back to the biological mismatch we started with. If the mathematics of urbanization guarantee a 15% spike in stress, crime, and just sheer overwhelming sensory stimulation every single time the city grows, how is our 150-person ancestral brain actually coping with this mathematical pressure cooker?
It's a struggle.
We know it's a shock to the system, but what is the city actually doing to the physical structure of our brains?
To see the neurological toll, we really have to look at a landmark 2011 study conducted by Andreas Meyer-Lindenberg. He's a neuroscientist at the Central Institute of Mental Health in Mannheim, Germany. And this study provided some of the first hard biological evidence of what the urban environment actually does to our neural circuitry.
I remember reading his methodology and thinking it was slightly sadistic, but brilliantly designed. Tell the listener how he actually tested this.
Yeah, it was intense. Meyer-Lindenberg wanted to see if the urban environment fundamentally alters how the brain processes social stress. So he recruited two distinct groups of healthy volunteers. One group currently living in dense cities, and another group living in rural areas.
To compare the baseline.
Exactly. He put them into an fMRI brain scanner to observe their neural activity in real time. But, just lying in a scanner isn't enough to trigger anything. He had to simulate the cognitive load of a city.
Right, he needed them stressed.
So he gave them a highly stressful, rapid-fire arithmetic task to solve while in the scanner. And to artificially spike their social stress, the researchers actively criticized their performance through the headphones, basically telling them they were failing.
He essentially bullied them in an MRI machine to see what their brains would do.
Basically, yes.
And when I was looking at this, I assumed the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles complex problem solving, would be the thing exhausted by the city. But that wasn't what lit up on the scans, was it?
No, the prefrontal cortex wasn't the differentiator at all. The structures that lit up wildly in the city dwellers were the amygdala and the perigenual anterior cingulate cortex, or the PACSAN.
The amygdala.
Yes. The amygdala is the brain's ancient primal threat detection center. It's the alarm system that triggers the fight or flight response. And the PCC helps regulate that amygdala response.
It's the fear center of the brain.
Yes, exactly. The fMRI scan showed that during the stressful task, the city dwellers had hyperactive amygdalas compared to their rural residents. Their threat detection systems were just dialed up to 11.
Wow.
Their brains were treating a math test and some mild social criticism like a literal life-or-death survival scenario on the savannah. The rural brains just didn't react with that level of primal alarm.
But the most crucial and frankly terrifying, part of that study wasn't just about where the person lived at the time of the scan. It was about where they spent their childhood, right?
That was the absolute breakthrough finding. The hyperactivity of the amygdala was linked to current city living. But the hyperactivity of the regulatory system was correlated directly with whether the person was raised in a city from childhood.
Let that sink in.
People who grew up in urban environments during their developmental years literally had their neural pathways wired differently. The chronic stimulation of the city during childhood permanently sensitized their brains to social stress.
So we have hundreds of millions of people walking around global megacities right now with hyperactive, highly sensitized threat detection systems. What does this mean for public health?
It translates into very real, quantifiable mental health crises. Epidemiological data consistently show significantly higher rates of schizophrenia, depression, and severe anxiety disorders in urban populations compared to rural ones.
It's just a constant strain.
The risk for schizophrenia, for instance, is often shown to be double for those raised in cities.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Is it possible that this is just a selection effect? Like, do people who are already suffering from mental health issues simply migrate to cities because that's where the psychiatric hospitals, the social services, and the specialized doctors are located?
That's a really valid question, and the researchers controlled for that exact variable. It's known as genetic or social drift. But even when you rigorously account for individuals moving to cities seeking medical infrastructure, the baseline rates of these disorders remain significantly higher. The environment itself is an active stressor.
So it's not just the people, it's the invisible architecture we talked about.
Exactly. It's the chronic, relentless, low-level cognitive friction of urban life. It's the constant noise pollution of sirens and construction. It's the physical crowding. But mostly, it is the constant low-level cognitive demand of navigating among thousands of strangers whose intentions you cannot possibly know.
That sustained hypervigilance.
Yeah, that hypervigilance takes a massive, measurable toll on the neural battery.
Which perfectly explains the mechanics behind attention restoration theory. We've touched on this briefly in other deep dives, but it is so crucial here.
It really is.
For those who don't know, attention restoration theory breaks human attention down into two categories: directed attention and soft fascination.
Yes. Directed attention is voluntary. It requires immense metabolic energy. When you are walking down a busy avenue in Manhattan, you are constantly making rapid-fire micro-decisions.
Right. Don't step off the curb while that taxi is turning.
Avoid bumping into the person texting on their phone. Filter out the flashing neon billboard. Ignore the siren. All of that requires active, directed cognitive effort. It rapidly depletes your mental battery.
Whereas natural environments engage soft fascination. Looking at a tree swaying in the wind or watching water flow in a river engages your involuntary attention.
Exactly.
It doesn't require cognitive effort to process a leaf. In fact, it actively restores the depleted mental battery.
Which highlights exactly why urban green spaces, like large parks, tree-lined sidewalks, community gardens, they are not just aesthetic luxuries or urban window dressing. They have vital public health infrastructure.
They are medicine.
Literally. The data shows that cities integrating substantial green space into their physical design produce populations with measurably lower cortisol levels. They have better overall mental health outcomes, reduced rates of cardiovascular disease, and importantly, higher levels of social trust. The visual input of nature literally lowers the physiological heat of the city.
Okay, so we are surrounded by strangers, our amygdalas are firing on overdrive, and our directed attention is completely depleted by the time we walk 3 blocks.
Right.
How do we actually survive this psychological onslaught on a daily basis without just collapsing on the sidewalk in a state of sheer panic?
We survive it by developing a very specific psychological armor. An early urban sociologist named George Simmel identified this phenomenon all the way back in 1903.
Over a century ago.
Yeah, he was observing the rapid industrialization of Berlin, watching people react to the new electric trams, the dense crowds, the relentless pace of modern life. And he coined a term for their psychological adaptation. He called it the blasé attitude.
The blasé attitude, the ultimate urban defense mechanism.
Yes. Simmel recognized that to survive the overwhelming sensory and social overload of the dense city, the dweller must cultivate a profound psychological distance. You learn to literally unsee the people around you.
You just tune them out.
You flatten your emotional responses. You walk past a person screaming on the corner or a beautiful street musician with the exact same flat, detached expression. You have to turn down your emotional bandwidth just to keep your nervous system from being totally overwhelmed.
It's like putting on a pair of psychological noise-canceling headphones before you step out of your apartment building.
Yeah.
You're actively blocking out the human frequencies so your brain can just function enough to get to the grocery store.
That is a brilliant analogy. The blasé attitude is a cognitive filter.
But there is such a profound, tragic paradox at the heart of this. Because those psychological noise-canceling headphones are absolutely necessary for survival. You would lose your mind without them.
You would.
But that very same blasé attitude directly causes one of the most famous documented phenomenons of modern existence, the crushing, pervasive loneliness of the city. You can be physically pressed against 3 million people in the Tokyo subway system and feel utterly, profoundly alone.
It is the ultimate paradox of urbanization, loneliness in the midst of millions. The very psychological adaptation we require to handle the density is the exact mechanism that severs our connection to the community around us. We isolate ourselves to survive the crowd.
It's heartbreaking when you frame it that way. But
Yeah.
despite this heavy psychological armor, despite the blasé attitude and the hyperactive amygdalas, we know that people do manage to connect.
They absolutely do.
In fact, they connect so effectively that, as Jeffrey West's power laws proved, cities generate the vast majority of our patents, our startups, and our artistic movements. So the big question is, how? How do specific spaces pierce through that tough blasé armor to spark that kind of world-changing creativity?
To understand the mechanics of that creativity, we have to look at the geography of innovation. We have to examine why some cities, or even specific neighborhoods within a city, are vastly more innovative than others.
Because it's not evenly distributed.
Not at all. Population density alone, as we've established, guarantees a baseline of superlinear growth, but it doesn't explain why certain specific clusters become historical hubs of genius.
Right, because not all cities are created equal when it comes to producing the next technological revolution.
Exactly. The urban theorist Richard Florida spent years studying this exact dynamic. He focused on what he termed the creative class: the knowledge workers, software engineers, artists, research scientists, and
The
designers.
people making the new stuff.
Right. He wanted to identify the precise urban characteristics that attracted this demographic and fostered their output. And he codified his findings into what is known as the 3T framework: tolerance, technology, and talent.
Tolerance, technology, and talent. Let's zero in on that first one, tolerance, because that seems to be the secret sauce that transforms a dense population into an innovative one.
It is the critical catalyst. Florida's core finding, which has been robustly supported by subsequent data, is that population density alone is insufficient to drive high-level innovation. Density must be combined with profound cultural diversity and social tolerance.
Meaning you need people from completely different backgrounds, different religions, different socioeconomic strata, all rubbing shoulders in the same geographic footprint.
Crucially, yes, cities that actively attract, welcome, and integrate diverse populations, and this specifically includes populations that have historically faced severe discrimination or marginalization, such as immigrant communities or the LGBTQ+ community, they tend to be significantly more innovative and economically resilient.
But what is the actual mechanism there? Why does a diverse neighborhood produce more patents than a homogeneous one?
It comes down to the collision of different problem-solving heuristics.
Okay, what does that mean?
Think of it this way. If everyone in a laboratory or a boardroom has the exact same cultural background, the same socioeconomic upbringing, and the same educational framework, they are highly likely to approach a complex problem from the exact same angle.
They share the same blind spots.
Exactly. But when you mix radically diverse perspectives, you facilitate creative recombination. An idea from one cultural background crashes into an engineering problem from another discipline, and that unforeseen collision is where paradigm-shifting innovation happens.
I want to take the listener back in time to what is arguably the ultimate historical case study of this exact phenomenon in action. We are going back to 17th and 18th century England.
Ah, the rise of the English coffee house.
Yes. The coffee house is, in my opinion, the greatest purpose-built innovation machine in human history. It perfectly engineered the conditions for the creative collisions we were talking about.
It is a phenomenal example because it manipulated both the physical environment and the biochemical state of the patrons simultaneously.
Exactly. Let's set the historical scene. Before the coffee house arrived, if you wanted to socialize in London, you went to the tavern. You drank ale or beer, often starting very early in the morning because the local water supply was usually contaminated and unsafe to drink.
Which means the entire population was perpetually slightly intoxicated. The typical social lubricant was alcohol, which is a central nervous system depressant.
It muddies cognitive function.
Right. It incapacitates complex thought.
But then coffee arrives from the Ottoman Empire, a potent stimulant. Suddenly, you have rooms full of people replacing a depressant with a mild stimulant that sharpens focus, keeps them awake late into the evening, and makes them highly talkative and energized.
But the beverage itself was only half the magic.
Exactly. The true genius was the mechanical design of the space itself. First, there was a 1 penny entrance fee.
That economic threshold is crucial. A single penny was cheap enough that almost any tradesman, sailor, or student could afford entry. It effectively made the space class-blind. In the incredibly rigid, highly stratified hierarchy of 17th century English society, this was a radical anomaly.
Right. You would have aristocratic lords sitting next to struggling poets, who were sitting next to wealthy merchants, who were sitting next to rough sea captains, and the physical furniture forced this interaction. They didn't design these spaces with little private two-top tables for quiet dates. They built massive, long communal tables. You were physically forced to sit shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers.
And the unspoken rules of the coffee house dictated that conversational topics were totally unrestricted. You were expected to engage. You could fiercely debate politics, dissect the latest commercial trade routes, argue about philosophy, or analyze new scientific discoveries, all at the same communal table, bridging social boundaries that would have strictly, severely separated these men in literally any other context of their lives.
And the historical results of this specific engineered environment are just mind-blowing. We think of a coffee house today as just a place to hang out with a laptop, but this environment birthed the modern world. Let's look at Lloyd's of London. Today, it is a colossal, multi-billion-dollar global insurance and reinsurance market. But it started literally as Edward Lloyd's Coffee House on Tower Street.
Yes. Ship captains returning from voyages, merchants looking to fund expeditions, and wealthy investors would all gather at Lloyd's, drink coffee, and exchange highly valuable, informal, tacit knowledge about maritime risk. Who spotted a terrible storm off the coast of Spain? Which specific trade routes are currently plagued by pirates? That informal, caffeine-fueled knowledge spillover eventually formalized and institutionalized into the modern global insurance industry.
And it wasn't just commerce. The Royal Society, one of the oldest and most prestigious scientific organizations on Earth, the place where Isaac Newton published his theories on optics and gravity, grew directly out of these informal coffeehouse discussion circles. Even the early financial instruments that eventually evolved into the modern London Stock Exchange were originally traded openly on the wooden tables of Jonathan's Coffee House.
If we look at the bigger picture today, modern urban planners and corporate architects are constantly, desperately trying to recreate the 17th century English coffee house. Look at the rise of the modern co-working space. Look at the architectural design of university common rooms. Look at the massive, sprawling tech campuses in Silicon Valley with their meticulously engineered informality. They intentionally place the micro kitchens and the bathrooms in highly specific, centralized locations to force software engineers from entirely different departments to bump into each other in the hallway. They're using physical design to force intellectual collisions.
I want you, the listener, to think about your own life right now. Where's your coffee house? Where do you go in your city or your town to accidentally bump into a new idea or cross paths with a person outside of your usual professional or social bubble? Because that physical architecture of serendipity is where the magic happens.
It is a vital question to ask oneself. However, we also have to temper this romantic excitement. We have to look at the reality of what happens when that engine of innovation overheats.
Yeah, but to flip the coin and look at the other side of Jeffrey West's equation, the superlinear scaling of the dysfunction.
We do. Because the romantic vision of the coffee house, mixing all the social classes beautifully and egalitarianly, is a wonderful historical snapshot. But modern global cities are often doing the exact opposite. We have to confront the severe structural costs of urban density, the dark side of cities.
The 115% scaling of the bad stuff.
Exactly. And the most glaring, physically visible reality of the modern global alpha city is extreme, unprecedented economic inequality.
It is completely unavoidable. You can walk down the street in almost any major global hub, San Francisco, London, Mumbai, and the disparity isn't just present. It is physically jarring in its proximity.
Cities are environments where inequality is geographically compressed. You can stand in a pristine glass and steel financial district where billions of dollars of capital are moving across fiber optic cables at the speed of light, and literally a 15-minute walk away, you can be standing in a deeply impoverished neighborhood with crumbling infrastructure, failing schools, and severe food deserts. The extremes share the exact same municipal grid.
The absolute wealthiest humans on the planet and the most marginalized, sharing the exact same geographic footprint, breathing the exact same air.
And it is crucial to understand that this extreme inequality is not just a moral or social justice issue, though it is profoundly that. The economic data shows that it is a massive structural vulnerability for the city itself. High levels of localized inequality measurably destroy social trust. It drastically lowers socioeconomic mobility for the poorest residents. And critically, epidemiological data shows it leads to worse health outcomes and lower life expectancies for everyone in the city, including the wealthy. The chronic physiological stress of that stark divide, the heightened security, the tension, it permeates the entire urban ecosystem.
Which leads directly into one of the most complex, politically contested, and painful issues in modern urban economics: gentrification and displacement.
Right, and we must view this impartially as an inherent self-cannibalizing economic loop. The very elements that make a specific neighborhood or city culturally valuable, the vibrant diversity, the agglomeration effect, the influx of highly paid knowledge workers, those exact elements drive up the fundamental economic value of the land itself.
The desperate demand to be near the magic pushes the rent into the stratosphere.
Exactly. And as the cost of living and property taxes skyrocket, the lower income residents, the working class families, the immigrant communities, the artists who originally created the vibrant cultural fabric that made the neighborhood desirable in the first place, they are systematically, economically priced out and displaced to the fringes of the city.
It's a bitter, tragic irony. The very cultural diversity that Richard Florida noted was absolutely essential for high-level innovation gets systematically erased by the economic success of that exact innovation. The neighborhood becomes a monoculture of wealth.
It is an incredibly difficult reality of urban economics globally. Planners grapple with this constantly. How do you maintain the economic engine of growth without displacing the very people who built the cultural machine? And the physical environment of the city itself often becomes hostile to those who remain. We have to talk about the physical climate of the city, specifically the urban heat island effect.
Yes, the thermodynamics of the city. Cities are fundamentally altering their own microclimates.
They are. Because we have systematically paved over natural cooling vegetation and replaced it with massive amounts of heat-absorbing concrete, dark asphalt, and towering buildings that block natural wind patterns, cities are significantly, measurably hotter than the surrounding rural areas. Asphalt has a very low albedo. It absorbs solar radiation all day and slowly radiates it back out all night, preventing the city from ever cooling down.
It's literally like living inside a massive brick oven that has been left on low all night.
And as global baseline temperatures continue to rise, this urban heat island effect is no longer just an uncomfortable inconvenience during August. It is a lethal public health crisis. Heat waves are the deadliest weather-related events globally, and the risk falls disproportionately on the elderly and the poor populations who lack access to reliable air conditioning or cooling centers.
And if you manage to survive the exorbitant rent and the lethal heat islands, you still have to physically navigate the city. Which brings us to the ultimate soul-crushing reality of modern urban existence.
The commute. Commuting is perhaps the most heavily studied, universally despised, and physiologically damaging routine experience associated with modern cities. The daily, grinding migration between the residential home and the commercial workplace.
The data on what commuting does to the human body is just brutal, isn't it?
It is entirely unambiguous. Extensive research consistently finds that long, unpredictable commutes, especially sitting in stagnant car traffic, actively reduce overall life satisfaction more than almost any other daily activity. It causes chronic, sustained spikes in cortisol and blood pressure. It physically robs people of the time needed for basic health-promoting activities like preparing nutritious meals, exercising, or sleeping. A long commute actively ruins your physical and mental health.
Okay, I have to push back hard on the history of urban planning here. If the data is so overwhelmingly, indisputably clear, if we know for an absolute medical fact that long commutes destroy our mental health, our cardiovascular health, and our happiness, why on earth did we spend the entire 20th century prioritizing car infrastructure? Why did we intentionally write municipal zoning laws that rigidly separate residential neighborhoods from commercial districts, practically forcing everyone to buy a car just to survive?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar historical question. For much of the 20th century, particularly in North America following the post-war boom, the prevailing dominant planning philosophy was exactly that: strict separation of uses. The well-intentioned idea was to keep the dirty, noisy, polluting industry far away from the quiet, clean residential homes. And the underlying assumption driving this was that the personal automobile was the ultimate liberating technology of the future. We built the physical landscape around the dimensions and needs of the car, completely ignoring the biological and social needs of the human. We are now paying the profound psychological and physiological debts of that colossal miscalculation.
So if we look at the complete picture, the extreme inequality, the lethal urban heat islands, the soul-crushing, health-destroying commutes, the hyperactive amygdalas. With all of this misery, you would rationally assume that given a viable alternative, everyone would just run for the hills. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and remote work suddenly became viable overnight, that was the dominant, inescapable narrative, wasn't it? The death of the city.
It was the prevailing headline for nearly 2 years. There were widespread, incredibly confident predictions from major economists and sociologists about the absolute permanent death of the dense urban core. The thesis was straightforward. Remote work severed the geographical tether. If you no longer have to commute to the downtown skyscraper 5 days a week, why would you continue to pay exorbitant rent to live in a noisy, hot, stressful, dense environment? The prediction was a mass, permanent migration to rural areas, small towns, and exurbs.
But the data today tells a remarkably different story, doesn't it?
A vastly more nuanced and surprising story. Yes, remote work absolutely allowed a specific demographic of knowledge workers to flee. We did see significant real population and economic decline in highly expensive tech-centric hubs, San Francisco being the prime example, as workers relocated to smaller Tier 2 cities or rural havens.
But the global alpha cities didn't die. New York, London, Tokyo, they didn't empty out and become hollowed out ghost towns.
Far from it. They proved incredibly stubbornly resilient. And this brings us right back to our first principles, back to Edward Glazer's definition. Why did they survive? Because the agglomeration effects, the massive specialized labor pools, the dense cultural amenities, the world-class restaurants, the sheer compounding network effects of being physically present in a massive global hub, those things do not just magically vanish because a subset of office workers are on Zoom 3 days a week.
The city is so much more than just a cluster of commercial office buildings. It's the theaters, the chaotic serendipity, the dating pool, the cultural friction.
Exactly. Humans are a deeply social species. We still fundamentally want to cluster. But what is changing, and this is the most fascinating transition in modern urbanism, is the internal physical geometry of the city itself. We are watching an evolution of form.
Let's dig into this evolution. If the city isn't dying, how is it reshaping itself? Where are we heading?
Historically, since the Industrial Revolution, we built monocentric cities.
The single dominant center.
Right. Picture a classic dartboard map of a city. A highly dense, towering commercial downtown core in the center, where all the highly paid jobs are concentrated, surrounded by vast, sprawling, low-density rings of residential suburbs. Millions of people all commute inward to the center in the morning, and they all commute outward to the edges at night.
Like a giant, incredibly stressful, carbon-emitting heartbeat.
Exactly. It's highly inefficient. But the future of urban design is leaning heavily toward a polycentric model.
Multiple centers of gravity.
Yes. A polycentric city has multiple distinct employment, cultural, and commercial hubs distributed widely across the entire metropolitan region. You don't have one single congested downtown. You have 5 or 6 vibrant mixed-use nodes. This structural evolution was already beginning before COVID, but the pandemic massively accelerated the shift.
And this polycentric evolution feeds perfectly into one of my absolute favorite, most hopeful new concepts in urban design, the 15-minute city.
Yes. The 15-minute city, pioneered by the urbanist Carlos Moreno. It has gained massive global traction in urban planning circles over the last few years.
I love this idea because the core premise is so elegantly simple, but implementing it is completely revolutionary given how we have built our world over the last century. The proposal is that we should actively redesign our urban environments into human-scale neighborhoods where absolutely everything you need for daily life, your workplace, your grocery store, your doctor's office, your kid's school, your parks, your entertainment, can be safely accessed within a 15-minute walk or a 15-minute bike ride from your front door.
It is the direct, intentional antidote to the toxic, car-dependent commute we just unpacked. It is fundamentally reorganizing the urban environment around human proximity, human biology, and pedestrian scale, rather than designing around the dimensions of a 2-ton automobile.
When you describe it like that, it sounds to me like we are actively trying to build that 150-person ancestral village right in the middle of a 10 million-person megacity. We are literally trying to hack our own biological habitat manual to make the environment livable for our ancient nervous systems again.
That is a profound way to conceptualize it. We are attempting to synthesize macroeconomic efficiency with microbiological livability, and we are going to have to master that synthesis rapidly because the livability of our cities is going to be tested by external forces like never before in human history.
You're talking about the climate crisis.
Yes. Climate adaptation is unequivocally the defining physical challenge for the future of cities in the 21st century. Cities are on the absolute, literal front lines of the crisis. Because they are often built on coasts and rivers for historical trade purposes, they are facing devastating sea level rise. Think of the existential threats facing Miami, New York, or Jakarta. They are facing the extreme heat we discussed with the heat island effect. They are facing radically altered precipitation patterns and intense, unpredictable weather events.
Because all that concrete and asphalt doesn't absorb rainwater. The natural drainage systems are paved over, so when intense storms hit, the city just floods instantly.
Exactly. The sheer physics of how cities rapidly adapt their physical infrastructure, how they build seawalls, how they tear up asphalt to create porous, water-absorbing green spaces, how they alter the albedo of their roofs to reflect heat, will physically determine whether these massive human habitats thrive or completely fail in the coming decades.
It's a massive, unprecedented physical and logistical reorganization of how we live. But even as the concrete, the steel, and the seawalls get rearranged, the core, fundamental function of the city remains unchanged. It continues to act as the ultimate communication network, and not just for the people living in a specific 15-minute neighborhood, but for the very language the entire globe uses to speak to each other.
This is a truly fascinating, often overlooked aspect of urban density, the city as a linguistic laboratory.
Let's talk about why cities actually matter for language, specifically focusing on English.
If you look at the global network of alpha cities, the absolute highest-tier hubs like New York, London, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, Mumbai, Sydney, that interconnected geographic network is the actual functional infrastructure of the English language today.
It's not just the language of the US or the UK anymore. The ownership is shifted.
Completely.
Mm.
English has become the primary medium of globalization. It is the operating system for global economic trade, scientific research, and cultural exchange. And because it operates on a global scale across vastly different cultures, it no longer exists as a single entity. It exists as a massive, diverse family of distinct varieties.
Right, you don't just have standardized English. You have London English, you have the incredibly unique English in Singapore, you have Nigerian English, Indian English, each with their own rich syntax and vocabulary.
And cities are the engines of change for every single one of those varieties. Because cities force that intense, inescapable physical proximity and cultural mixing, the exact same dynamic we discussed with the 3 Ts and the creative collisions in the coffee houses, they are the primary generators of language evolution.
That creative collision applies to words and grammar, too.
Exactly. Slang, neologisms, the rapid fluid code switching between multiple languages and dialects on a single crowded subway car. This rapid linguistic mutation only happens in the dense pressure cooker of the city. The version of English that the world will speak in the year 2050 is not being carefully decided by a committee of dictionary editors in a quiet academic room. It is being aggressively, dynamically forged on the chaotic streets of these global hubs right now.
So what does this all actually mean for you? If you are a listener right now, especially if you are someone actively learning a new language or just trying to improve your communication skills or understand cultural shifts, this completely reframes everything. It reframes the city from being just this stressful, noisy, polluted environment that you have to endure into being a natural, living, breathing laboratory. You know, language teachers always give that standard advice. Use your city. Go out and talk to native speakers. It turns out that's not just a cute tip for practicing vocabulary flashcards. It is a profound linguistic strategy based on network theory. The city offers a richness of context, a sheer speed of evolution, and a depth of cultural collision that absolutely no textbook, app, or classroom could ever possibly match. When you walk out your door, you are walking through the absolute cutting edge of human communication.
That is a highly empowering lens through which to view your environment. You aren't just passively surviving the city's density, you are actively participating in its primary evolutionary function.
Exactly. Okay, we have covered an incredible sweeping amount of ground today on this deep dive. Let's trace the arc of the journey we just took. We started with the sheer biological evolutionary shock, the staggering reality that we took an ancient brain built for 150 people on a quiet savanna and dropped it into a roaring megacity of millions in just a couple of centuries.
We examined the hard mathematics of that shock Geoffrey West's inescapable 15% rule, demonstrating how the brilliant economic and creative agglomeration effects scale superlinearly at the exact same rate as violent crime and infectious disease. The ultimate package deal.
We looked under the hood at the neuroscience,
Yeah.
seeing how the constant cognitive friction of the city literally wires our amygdala to be on high alert from childhood, forcing us to adopt that blasé attitude, those psychological noise-canceling headphones, just to survive walking down the sidewalk.
But we also celebrated the triumph of that density, the brilliant, engineered, creative collisions of the 17th century English coffee house, and how cultural diversity fundamentally drives paradigm-shifting innovation.
We didn't shy away from the dark, structural realities, the extreme proximate inequality, the tragedy of displacement, the lethal heat, and the literal physiological toxicity of the daily commute. But we look forward, too. We look to a future where we might reorganize into polycentric, 15-minute human-scale neighborhoods that hack our biology back into a state of well-being, all while the city continues to serve as the global, chaotic laboratory for language and culture.
It is an infinitely complex, beautifully resilient, and sometimes terrifying machine we've built.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought, something to really mull over as you navigate your own urban environment today. We have established, fundamentally, that the city is a communication technology. Its entire economic and creative power is based entirely on the physical proximity and friction of human beings.
Huh.
But what happens when artificial intelligence becomes our primary, dominant communication partner? What happens when the entity you bounce your most complex, innovative ideas off of doesn't require a physical chair at a coffee house, but exists entirely in the cloud? Will we still biologically need to cluster together in megacities to innovate? Or will the cities of the future be built for something entirely different than work and economic output?
That is the next great uncharted frontier of the human experiment.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you step outside, I encourage you to truly look around your own neighborhood. Look past the concrete, the glass, and the cars, and try to see the invisible network forces, the scaling laws, and the historical collisions at play right in front of you. You're not just living in a city, you're living inside the most complex technology humanity has ever built. After all, we're the only animal that writes its own habitat manual.